Alpha King Ralph was buried before the bells ever rang for him. Not on a battlefield, not beneath the silver banners of Silverfang. In a forgotten hunter's pit, deep inside Blackwood Forest, where the mist never lifted and the wolves refused to howl, his own daughter gave the order. By sunrise, Princess Regina stood before a grieving kingdom in a black veil, her voice breaking on cue, her hands perfectly clean. The healers said the king's heart had simply stopped in his sleep. No one questioned a daughter's tears. No one except the forest itself, which had heard everything. Ralph had ruled Silverfang for 40 winters, and even his rivals admitted he had ruled it well. He was the alpha who walked through famine villages, instead of sending coin in his place. The widower, who never remarried, because no mate after his first had ever come close. The king who had handed his only daughter more power than any council thought wise, simply because he could not imagine the girl he'd raised wanting anything from him but his approval. It was that trust, more than any blade, that had put him in the ground. 3 miles from the palace, an Omega named Sylvia Farmer noticed only that the birds had stopped singing. She'd lived in Blackwood long enough to know its moods, the difference between a storm coming and something wrong. This morning felt wrong. The wind carried a scent she recognized in her bones before her mind caught up. Not deer, not rabbit. Alpha blood, old, powerful, spilled somewhere close. Every instinct she owned told her to run. She walked toward it instead. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. Sylvia had no pack, no surname worth remembering, no parents who'd ever come looking. 23 winters ago, someone had left her on the monastery steps, wrapped in a blanket stitched with silver wolves no elder could name, and she'd been passed between pack households ever since. An orphan Omega, the lowest rank a wolf could hold in Silverfang. She served. She kept her eyes down. She had learned, early and well, that wanting more only made the wanting hurt worse, so she gathered roots instead, mended wings, sat with dying things so they wouldn't go alone. It wasn't kindness exactly. She had simply never found a way to walk past suffering and keep walking. That, more than anything, was about to get her killed. The clearing came into view between the black pines, soil churned and heaped, where the forest floor should have lain undisturbed for 100 years. Hunters didn't bury their kills. Wolves didn't bury their dead outside the sacred groves. She was still working out who had, when she heard it. A scratch, faint enough to doubt. She knelt and pressed her ear to the dirt anyway, holding her breath until her chest burned. Scratch. She didn't remember deciding, only that her basket hit the ground and her hands were already tearing at the earth. Roots shredding her nails, stones splitting her palms, mud climbing past her wrists. Her shoulders screamed, her lungs gave out twice, and she kept going anyway, because stopping had never once been a thing she knew how to do. She didn't stop to wonder if she was already too late. Stopping to wonder had never once saved anything. An hour, maybe more, before her fingers struck cloth, then skin. A hand, cold and still, until it closed weakly around her wrist. She clawed faster after that, uncovering broad shoulders, hair black with mud, a face bruised nearly blue from lack of air. She dragged him free, inch by inch, until they both collapsed onto the pine needles, and for several unbearable seconds, he didn't breathe at all. She cleared his mouth, tilted his head, pressed both palms flat against his chest and pushed. Once, twice, 3 times, until he gasped, coughed up mud and bile, went limp against her arms like something newly born. That was when she saw his eyes, silver, unmistakable. The same eyes stamped on every coin in Silverfang, painted into every royal portrait from here to the capital. Alpha King Ralph, the man the kingdom was mourning at that exact moment, was breathing against her shoulder, barely alive, buried by someone who had clearly meant for him to stay that way. Fear hit her a full second before sense did. If anyone found an orphan Omega kneeling over the missing king, no explanation on earth would save her life. She should leave. Now, before anyone knew she had ever been here. She got as far as standing. A mud-blackened hand closed around her wrist, Please. His voice was barely air. Don't leave me. She'd heard those words before, from frightened children at the monastery, from dying animals cradled in her lap, from herself, some nights, when there had been no one left to say them to. She knelt back down instead. Getting him upright took everything she had. He stood a head taller than her, even half-conscious, his breathing shallow, strange bruises ringing both wrists in the shape of chains. They had made it only a few staggering steps into the trees when he froze, his gaze locked on something behind them. Riders. 5. Cloaked, royal insignia hidden beneath dark wool, gathered at the edge of the empty grave. It's empty, one called out. A pause, then sharper. Someone dug him out. Princess Regina said no mistakes. Ralph went rigid against her. What is it? Sylvia whispered. It took him a long moment to find the words. My daughter. His jaw tightened like each one cost him blood. I heard her voice before they covered my face. She told me she loved me. A sound escaped him that might once have been a laugh. Then she told them to keep digging. Sylvia had braced herself for rival nobles, for power-hungry cousins, for any of the ordinary cruelties a kingdom produced. Not this. Not a daughter who buried the father who had raised her, and meant every word of the apology first. You saved my life, Ralph said, leaning his weight into her shoulder. I only dug. No. His silver eyes, exhausted and certain, found hers. You chose not to leave. A shout went up behind them, one of the riders pointing toward the trees, toward 2 sets of footprints leading away from the grave. Horns answered, sharp and close. Run, Ralph rasped. Sylvia didn't ask where. She tightened her grip on a man the entire kingdom believed already dead, and pulled him deeper into Blackwood Forest, branches tearing at both of them, the horns rising behind every step, toward whatever waited in the dark, because whatever it was, it had to be safer than what they were leaving behind. They ran until the horns faded into birdsong, and Ralph could no longer stay upright without her. Sylvia steered them off the deer trail, through a wall of brambles that left scratches across both their arms, to a slope of moss-covered stone she'd memorized years ago. Behind it sat a ranger's cabin, half swallowed by ivy, abandoned by the crown long before she was born. She'd found it as a girl, patched its roof herself, stocked it with what little she could spare. No one else in Blackwood knew it stood. She shouldered the door open and lowered Ralph onto the cot inside. This is where you live, he managed, between breaths. This is where I disappear, she said. Sometimes there's a difference. He didn't ask what she meant. She was grateful for that. Getting him onto the cot had taken the last of her strength, and for a moment, she simply knelt on the dirt floor and let herself shake. Then she made herself stand, because shaking never fixed anything either. She worked through the afternoon by the light through a single shuttered window, boiling water, tearing clean linen, kneeling beside the cot to clean what the grave had done to him. Bruises mapped his ribs in colors no healer's salve would touch overnight. The rope burns at his wrists were the worst of it, raw and deep, the kind that came from a man fighting his bindings long after fighting stopped making sense. You don't have to be gentle, Ralph said, watching her hands. I'm not being gentle for you, she said. I'm being gentle so it heals faster. Hold still. He huffed something that might have been a laugh, then winced, then went quiet while she worked. By evening, she'd built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke low, and split what bread she had between them. She gave him the larger half without comment, and ate her own sitting on the floor, back against the cot, because there was only one chair, and she'd given it to him, without thinking twice. He noticed. You always do that, Ralph said. Do what? Take less. Sit lower. Eat last. His silver eyes studied her in the firelight, something unreadable behind them. I've sat at tables with nobles who couldn't manage that once in their lives, and you do it without seeming to notice you're doing it. Sylvia shrugged, uncomfortable under the attention. Habit. Bad one, he said. You saved a king. You're allowed the bigger piece of bread. It startled a real laugh out of her. Short, surprised, gone almost as soon as it came, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep it. He watched it happen like he'd been handed something rare. For her part, what struck Sylvia wasn't his crown or his name. It was that every time he needed something, Water, a blanket, help shifting his weight off the bruised ribs. He apologized first. 40 years a king, and he still flinched at asking for help, as though needing anyone was a debt he hadn't earned the right to call in. No one had ever spoken to her like she had a say in anything. He did, without trying. "Tell me about her," Sylvia said eventually, feeding another branch into the fire. "Regina, before tonight." Ralph was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "She was brilliant," he said finally. "Still is, I imagine. She pushed reforms this past year. Harsher penalties, tighter borders, less mercy for the packs who couldn't pay their dues. I told myself she wanted a stronger Silverfang." His jaw tightened. "I didn't ask who was funding her popularity. 3 of my own council seats turned in her favor, faster than reform alone should have bought them. Corrupt nobles," Sylvia said. "I assume so now. I didn't want to see it then." He looked down at his ruined wrists. "She's my daughter. I taught myself not to see things in her Torin. I would have caught in anyone else within a day. A king who can't trust his own blood has no business ruling. That's what I told myself, every time something felt wrong, and I chose to look away instead." Sylvia said nothing. There was nothing kind to say to that, and she'd never learned to offer comfort she didn't mean. It was the crunch of boots on the slope outside that ended the conversation. Not soldiers, just a passing crier. His voice carrying thin and practiced through the trees, reciting the same lines he was no doubt reciting in every village before sundown. "By order of the council, Alpha King Ralph passed peacefully in his sleep. The kingdom mourns. Princess Regina accepts the mantle of her father's house." Sylvia went still. Beside her, the man the kingdom was mourning sat very straight, firelight catching the hollows under his eyes, listening to his own funeral notice read aloud through the trees, like it belonged to someone else. "They're already burying you twice," Sylvia whispered. "The first time nearly worked," Ralph said quietly. "Don't let her get a third chance." Neither of them spoke for a long while after the crier's voice faded. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the cabin's thin trail of smoke out over the ridge, and with it, very faintly, the sound of horses slowing on the path below. Sylvia rose and crossed to the shuttered window, easing it open a crack. Torches. 4 riders, dismounted, crouched at the base of the slope where the moss gave way to bare dirt, where 2 sets of footprints, fresh and unmistakable, led straight toward the cabin door. They were out the back window before the torches reached the door. Sylvia knew the ridge better than the riders ever could, a goat path along the rock face, invisible unless you already knew where to put your feet. They followed it in silence until the search horns dropped behind them, swallowed by distance and pine, and didn't stop moving again until dawn. 200 miles away, inside a palace draped in black silk, Princess Regina was crying beautifully. She knelt before her father's empty casket, sealed shut by her own decree, so no wolf could ask why it weighed nothing, and let the tears come exactly when the priest reached the part about mercy. The hall wept with her. 1,000 wolves, watching their princess break, never once questioning that a woman who could order an army could also fake an army of tears. She straightened the moment the chamber doors closed behind the mourners. "Find him," she told the captain waiting in the shadows. Her voice didn't shake now. It hadn't shaken in days. Quietly this time. No grave, no witnesses. "I won't make that mistake twice." The captain bowed and left without a word. Regina turned back to the casket she'd ordered built for a man who wasn't in it, and felt nothing close to guilt. Only the old, familiar ache of being right about something no one else could see. Her father's mercy had bled the treasury dry, feeding packs who wouldn't fight for their own borders. His forgiveness had let traitors keep their titles. She had watched him weaken Silverfang one kindness at a time for 30 years, and she would not watch it happen for 30 more. She didn't hate him. That was the part no one would ever understand. She had simply decided, long before tonight, that loving him wasn't reason enough to let him ruin everything he'd built. A kingdom needed teeth, not tears. She had spent a year proving it could have both, if someone was finally willing to make the harder choices her father never could. And she would not let one stubborn, half-drowned old man undo a year's work, because he was still, somehow, breathing. In Blackwood, Sylvia and Ralph reached the road by mid-morning. Disguised in a peddler's spare cloaks, She'd traded herbs for months ago and never thought she'd need. Ralph walked with his head down and a limp he didn't have to fake. Silver eyes hidden beneath a hood, 2 sizes too large. The village of Thornmere came into view by afternoon. Modest, sturdy, draped in black mourning ribbon on every door. "Did you hear?" a woman was telling another at the well, voice thick with grief, taken in his sleep, peaceful as anything. "The goddess was kind to him at least. The princess will do right by us," the second answered. "Stronger borders. No more bandits crossing from the east. Some fool was saying he's alive," the first muttered, lowering her voice like the words were dangerous. "Spreading it through Aldwych. They should hang whoever started that rumor. Mocking the dead." Ralph said nothing the entire walk through the square. Sylvia didn't either. There was nothing to say to a kingdom mourning a man walking 3 feet behind them, cursing the truth as a lie. They reached an empty barn at the village edge before dusk, paid for with the last of Sylvia's coin, and a story about a sick husband, too contagious for the inn. She built a small fire in an old cooking pit and set a pot of stew to simmer, and made the mistake of believing she could watch the road and the fire at the same time. She couldn't. The smell hit her first, thick, scorched, unmistakable. "It's fine," she said quickly, stirring at the blackened mess like speed could undo it. "It's mostly fine." Ralph leaned over to look, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do once since the grave. He laughed. Not a polite huff this time. A real laugh, low and surprised out of him, like it had been locked somewhere for years, and finally found the door. "Mostly fine," he repeated, shoulders shaking. "Sylvia, that is not stew. That is a punishment. It still has flavor," she said, fighting her own smile and losing. "It has something." She swatted his arm with the spoon, which only made him laugh harder, and for one unguarded moment, neither of them was a fugitive king, or an orphan girl who'd never had reason to laugh at anything. They were just 2 people by a fire, ruining dinner together. Sylvia found, somewhere in the middle of it, that she liked the sound of his laugh more than she had any right to. She filed the thought away to examine later, when it didn't feel so dangerous to look at directly. They were still smiling when the barn door creaked. An old man stood in the gap, lantern raised, eyes moving slowly from Ralph's hood to the silver flash of his eyes beneath it. The lantern shook in his hand. "Goddess above," he breathed. "You're supposed to be dead." The old man didn't shout. He didn't run for the village either. He simply lowered the lantern, studied Ralph's face a moment longer, and said, "I buried your father, Your Highness. 40 years past. I know that face better than I know my own." Then quieter, "Whoever's hunting you won't hear it from me, but you can't stay in Thornmere. Too many eyes." He gave them directions instead of trouble, a half-day's walk north, to a sanctuary the Crown had forgotten existed, run by a woman who'd kept Silverfang's old records longer than anyone living. "Sister Agnes," he said, "if anyone in this kingdom knows what to do with a dead king, it's her." They left before sunrise. The sanctuary sat at the end of an overgrown lane, stone walls draped in ivy, a chapel bell long gone silent. Sister Agnes met them at the gate before they'd said a word. A small, sharp-eyed woman, older than the building itself, who took one look at Ralph's hooded face and one look at Sylvia beside him, and said only, "Well, you'd better come in before someone follows you." She fed them. She asked no questions about the king, which somehow made Ralph trust her faster than if she'd asked 100. It was only when Sylvia shrugged off her travel cloak that Agnes went very still. "That blanket," the old woman said, "the one wrapped around your shoulders. Where did you get it?" "It's mine," Sylvia said, confused. "I've had it since the monastery. They said I was found wearing it." Agnes crossed the room faster than her age should have allowed and took the fabric in both hands, tracing the faded silver wolves stitched into the corner with fingers that trembled. "Child," she breathed, "do you know what this is?" Sylvia shook her head. "This isn't a Silverfang crest." Agnes turned the blanket over, revealing a second, smaller mark worked into the seam. One Sylvia had never noticed in 23 years, half hidden in the stitching. "This is older, far older, a bloodline the histories barely mention, scattered or murdered before Silverfang ever rose. I've seen this mark exactly once before, in a record so old The ink had nearly vanished. "That doesn't mean anything," Sylvia said quickly. "It's just thread. Someone's idea of decoration. Someone wrapped a newborn in royal thread and left her on monastery steps instead of a throne," Agnes said gently. "That's not decoration. That's someone hiding you." Sylvia stood, blanket clutched too tight in her hands, and walked to the window so neither of them would see her face. "I'm an orphan. No surname, no pack, no one who ever wanted me. That's the whole of my story. It has been for 23 years. Her voice cracked on the last word, despite everything she did to stop it. "I don't need a fairy tale about hidden crowns. I need you to be wrong." No one pushed her further. Ralph, watching from the cot Agnes had made up for him, said nothing at all. But something in his face had changed, quiet and certain, like he was seeing her for the first time and the second time at once. Later, while Agnes searched her archive room for the record she half remembered, Ralph caught Sylvia's hand as she passed with a fresh basin of water. "You don't have to believe it tonight," he said. "I don't intend to believe it ever. Fair enough?" He studied her face in the candlelight. Tired, stubborn, refusing to let the ground shift under her twice in 1 week. "I've known queens who would have already redesigned the throne room on rumor alone. You're standing here arguing against your own crown. I'm not interested in a crown. I know," he said. That's rather the point. He'd watched her dig a king out of the earth with her bare hands, give away her own bread without thinking, laugh despite a burned dinner and a kingdom hunting them both, and now refuse a bloodline that might have explained every lonely year of her life, simply because she wasn't certain it was true. Compassion he'd seen before, in healers paid well to perform it. Humility like hers, he hadn't, not once, in 40 years on a throne. "You should rest," she told him, nodding toward the cot. "Your Majesty." "Don't call me that. Not here." "Then what should I call you?" "My name would do." "You're my patient," she said instead, firm as a closing door, and pressed him gently back down onto the cot before he could argue. Kings don't get opinions about their own bandages. He let her win, mostly because he wanted to watch her win. 200 miles south, Regina sat alone in her father's old study, listening to a different kind of report. "Soldiers leave trails," she told the man kneeling before her. "Not a captain this time. Not anyone wearing crown colors at all. Rogue wolves, the kind who answered to coin instead of oaths. The kind no court record would ever connect to her name. Soldiers can be questioned. Soldiers have families who ask why they didn't come home. And us," the rogue asked. "You don't exist," Regina said. "Find the sanctuary near Thornmere. I want no survivors who can say what they saw. Not the king, not the girl, not the old woman who's no doubt hiding them out of misplaced sentiment." The rogue bowed and left without another word, exactly the way she preferred. Back at the sanctuary, candlelight still burning, Agnes returned from the archive room with a record so old its cover had gone soft with age, and froze in the doorway, ash already drifting past her like grey snow. "Fire," she gasped. "The East Wing, fire." Sylvia was on her feet before the word finished leaving the old woman's mouth, smoke already curling thick beneath the chapel door. The night outside lit orange where there should have been only stars. Someone had made sure there would be no witnesses left to question at all. They went out through the kitchen garden as the East Wing collapsed behind them. Agnes pressed between them, the old record clutched to her chest, like the only thing in the world that still mattered. "The marsh," Sylvia said, already moving. "This way. Run." They didn't make it far before the rogues found them. 5 shapes breaking from the tree line. No crown colors, no banners. Nothing that would ever trace back to a princess. Ralph turned to face them anyway. Every inch the king he still was beneath the mud and bruises. And Sylvia grabbed his sleeve before he could. "You can't fight them. Not like this. Not yet." "Then what?" "Trust me." She led them off the path instead of onto it, into ground that sucked at their boots and slowed every step. Ground she'd walked 100 times, gathering roots no healer in the capital would touch. The rogues followed, faster, stronger, gaining with every stride, until the marsh did what marshes always did to wolves who didn't know its moods, and the ground opened beneath the lead rogue's weight, with a sound like the earth swallowing. He went down to his chest, cursing, and the others slowed just enough. It was enough. Sylvia struck flint to a bundle of dried bitter moss she'd grabbed without thinking on the way out, and the smoke that rose was thick, sharp, the kind that scrambled a wolf's sense of smell for an hour if they breathed too deep of it. She threw it behind them as they ran, and the shouts that followed turned confused, scattered, chasing scent trails that led nowhere at all. They didn't stop until the marsh gave way to high ground, and the shouts faded entirely. Ralph collapsed against a fallen log, chest heaving, staring at her, like he was seeing something he didn't have a name for yet. "You didn't raise a hand," he said. "5 of them, and you never raised a hand." "I didn't need to. I needed them lost." She sat beside him, hands still shaking from the run, the adrenaline draining out and leaving something rawer behind. "Fighting isn't the only way to win, Ralph. It's just the one everyone notices." He was quiet a long moment, watching the firelight that wasn't there yet, the dark settling around them. "Why did you save me?" he asked finally. "That first morning. You could have walked past the grave. No one would have ever known." Sylvia looked at her own hands, scarred now, nails still healing from the digging. "Because nobody saved me," she said. "Not once. Not when I was small enough that it would have mattered most. I used to lie awake wondering what it would have taken. One person, just one, choosing not to walk past me." She shrugged, like the answer embarrassed her. "I couldn't be that person for myself, 20 years too late. But I could be it for you." Something shifted in Ralph's chest at that. Not pain, not quite, but close enough that he pressed a hand flat against his ribs without meaning to. "Are you hurt?" Sylvia asked, already reaching for him. "No. I felt..." He stopped, frowning. "I felt what you just said. Not heard it. Felt it. Like it happened to me." Sylvia went still. She'd felt it too, in the seconds before he spoke. A flicker of something that wasn't entirely her own fear, threading through her chest, like it had borrowed the space. Neither of them had words for it yet. Neither of them needed to. Something old and unasked for had begun stitching itself between them, thread by thread, since the moment her hands had broken through the dirt to find his. A current running both directions now, carrying fear when one of them felt it, carrying calm when the other found it first. Sylvia didn't understand it. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Not yet, but she noticed, sitting beside him in the dark, that his breathing had steadied the moment hers did, as though their bodies had quietly agreed to share the burden between them. It was the rogue they'd left half buried in the marsh mud, dragged back and bound by Agnes's steady hand and Sylvia's borrowed rope, who gave them the rest. "I'll talk," he said, before anyone asked. "I'm not dying for her secrets." His eyes flicked to Ralph, fevered with fear. "She didn't just bury you. The burial was to hide it. You were poisoned 3 days before. Slow acting, meant to look like illness. The grave was only ever meant to bury the evidence with you." The words landed like a second betrayal, colder than the first. Ralph's hand went to his own chest again, and this time the pain wasn't borrowed from anyone. He doubled over, breath catching wrong in his throat, and when he straightened, his palm came away from his lips dark with blood. "Ralph!" Sylvia caught him before he hit the ground, his weight dragging them both down into the wet grass. "Ralph, stay with me." The poison that had been waiting patiently in his blood since before the grave had finally decided it was done waiting. They carried him to a hollow beneath an old willow, the only shelter the night offered, and Sylvia spent what was left of it on her knees in the dark, hands raking through every plant she knew by smell alone. Willow bark for the fever, yarrow for the bleeding. Nothing she carried touched whatever moved through his blood now. "Slow acting," Agnes murmured, kneeling beside him with a candle stub cupped against the wind. "Bred to look like illness," the rogue said. "That means it was never meant to be cured quickly. Whoever made it wanted time, not mercy." "Then I'll find what it needs," Sylvia said, already on her feet again. She searched until her hands bled fresh through scabs that hadn't closed from the grave, returning each time with roots that helped a little, and never enough. By the second day, Ralph's fever had settled into something heavier, his silver eyes dimmer in the firelight, his breath shorter between sentences. He still tried to laugh when she burned the willow bark tea. "You have a gift," he rasped, "for ruining anything involving fire. Stop talking, drink this." "Bossy," he said, but drank it anyway. and let his head fall back against the willow roots, with his eyes still on her. "Sylvia, sit with me a moment. Just sit." She sat. "If this doesn't," he started. "It will. If it doesn't," he said again, gentler. "I need you to hear something first, not as a king, as a man who's run out of time to be careful about saying things." Sylvia's hands stilled in her lap. "I grew up the second son," Ralph said. "No one expected the crown to find me. I spent my boyhood fishing the Silvermere with my brother, certain I'd live and die a soldier in someone else's service. I never wanted the throne. I wanted to be a father who came home for supper." A faint, tired smile. "I got half of what I wanted." "Regina," Sylvia said quietly. "Regina." He closed his eyes. "My greatest regret isn't the grave. It's every warning sign I told myself not to see, because seeing them meant admitting I'd raised someone capable of this. I failed her long before she failed me." "You didn't fail her," Sylvia said. "She chose this. You can't carry a choice that was never yours to make. You sound certain of that." "I've spent my whole life being told what I was because of choices other people made for me," she said. "I'd like to think it doesn't work that way. For either of us." He looked at her a long moment, fever bright and unguarded. "What did you want? Before any of this?" "Before me. A house," she admitted, surprised by how easily it came. "Somewhere with a door. I never had to give up. Someone who'd notice if I didn't come home." Her voice dropped. "I used to think wanting it was foolish. For someone like me. It isn't foolish." His hand found hers in the dark, fever warm and trembling. "Sylvia, I think." "Don't," she whispered, though she didn't pull away. "Don't say it like you're saying goodbye." "I'm not saying goodbye." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "I'm saying I should have told you sooner. Because I... Child." Agnes's voice cracked through the hollow, breathless. The old record clutched against her chest. "Sylvia, I found it. I found your parents." Whatever Ralph had been about to say dissolved into the dark between them, unfinished, hanging there like something neither of them would forget. Sylvia turned, heart still racing for an entirely different reason. "What did you find?" "They weren't faceless," Agnes said, kneeling with the brittle pages spread across her lap. "Your mother and father, sworn protectors of the old bloodline, the ones stitched into your blanket. The record names them. Loyal, hidden, careful for years." Her voice shook. "They were murdered, Sylvia. 23 years ago, the same season you appeared at the monastery. Someone silenced the protectors and hid the child they died protecting." Sylvia's breath left her all at once. "I wasn't abandoned." "No," Agnes said softly. "You were saved. By people who loved you enough to die keeping you hidden. 23 years of believing she'd been unwanted, cracked open all at once. And Sylvia didn't know which feeling to hold first. Grief for parents she'd never have a chance to thank, or the strange, terrible relief of finally understanding why. It was the sound of boots, many of them, fast, deliberate, that ended the moment before either feeling could settle. Agnes rose first, the record still in her hands, and stepped toward the hollow's mouth to look. "Run," she said. Too late. Hands closed around her before the word finished leaving her mouth, dragging her back into the dark, the old record torn from her grip and tossed aside like nothing. "Tell your princess," Agnes called out, voice steady even as they hauled her away, "that some of us would rather die telling the truth than live serving her lies." Then the hollow fell silent, and Sylvia was alone with a dying king and a truth too new to hold. The antidote Sylvia finally found wasn't a cure, just frostroot and crushed bellflower, bitter enough to slow the poison instead of stop it. It bought Ralph his feet back, and little else. He walked the road to the capital leaning on her shoulder, fever-banked but not gone. Silver eyes ringed in shadow. "We shouldn't be doing this," Sylvia said, for the third time since the gates came into view. "Agnes is in there because of us," Ralph said. "I won't leave her to die for keeping a secret that was never hers to carry." They slipped through a tradesman's gate at dusk, hoods low, and found a capital draped entirely in white and gold. Coronation banners hung from every window, garlands strung between the rooftops, a kingdom decorating itself for a queen who hadn't yet buried her king a second time. The palace square was worse. Sylvia counted the gallows being built at its center and understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, exactly whose execution it had been raised for. "Agnes," she breathed. They never reached her. Hands seized Sylvia from behind before she'd finished the thought, dragging her back from Ralph so fast he barely had time to turn before 3 more wolves had him pinned against the wall. By the time the crowd of guards parted, Princess Regina was already standing in the gap, dressed for her own coronation, watching the 2 of them like a problem finally solved. "Father," she said, "you look terrible." "Regina," his voice cracked on her name. "Let the girl go. This is between us. It stopped being between us the moment you let her dig you out of the ground." Regina circled Sylvia slowly, studying her the way one studied an unwanted guest. "An orphan Omega, saving a king. How romantic. The bards will love it, once I decide what version of this story they're allowed to tell." "Where is Agnes?" Sylvia demanded. "Alive. For now." Regina's gaze flicked back to Ralph. "Here is your choice, father, and I'll only offer it once. Walk back into that palace, kneel before the council, and confirm the story everyone already believes, that you died peacefully, that you've come to bless my coronation from beyond. Whatever fiction keeps the kingdom calm. The girl lives. You live, quietly, somewhere I never have to see your face again. And if I refuse, then she dies first," Regina said simply. "And you shortly after. I'd rather not, but I will." "Take me instead," Ralph said immediately. "Let her walk away. I'll go wherever you want. Say whatever you want." "No," Sylvia's voice cut through the square, steadier than she felt. "I didn't dig you out of the ground so you could climb back into a different one. I won't let you trade yourself for me." "Sylvia." "I won't." Regina watched them both with something unreadable crossing her face. Not quite pity, not quite envy, something closer to a wound she'd long since stopped tending. "How touching," she said. "I almost envy it. I never had anyone offer to die for me. Only people willing to lie to my face about it." "Regina." Ralph's voice had gone quiet, pleading in a way Sylvia hadn't heard from him yet. "Why? I need to understand why." For a moment, the princess who'd cried so beautifully at a funeral she'd ordered looked almost young. "Because I heard you," she said. 2 months before the grave. Your advisors, the ones I trusted most, they told me you'd found another bloodline, an older claim, that you meant to set me aside the moment you found an heir who wouldn't embarrass you with reform you called reckless." Her composure cracked, just slightly. "I spent a year proving I could be strong enough to keep this kingdom standing, and the one reward I wanted was for you to see it. Instead, I heard you were already looking past me, so I believed them. I buried you before you could bury me first." "I never said that," Ralph whispered. "I never even knew about a bloodline until 5 days ago." "Regina, that was a lie. Whoever told you that lied to you." Regina's face went very still. The certainty that had carried her through a coronation, an army of rogues, a father's grave, faltering for the first time in front of witnesses. It wasn't enough to stop her. "Guards," she said, voice steadying even as her hands didn't. "Take him into custody. Publicly. Let the kingdom see their king returned a traitor, plotting against his own throne." "Regina, wait." But the wolves were already moving, chains already closing around Ralph's wrists for the second time in a week, the crowd gathering at the square's edge to watch their resurrected king dragged toward the very gallows built for someone else. Sylvia screamed his name. No one stopped to listen. She fought the hands holding her until her shoulder burned, watching the crowd close around Ralph, like the square had been built for exactly this moment. A king, dragged in chains past banners hung for the woman who'd ordered him buried twice. Somewhere in that crowd, she told herself, were people who still remembered the king who walked through famine villages. She just had to find a way to make them remember before the gallows finished what the grave had started. They brought Ralph to the platform at midday, chains catching the sun, and Regina stood beside him in coronation white, as if the contrast were intentional. "This man," she announced, voice carrying clean across the square, returned from the grave to plot against the very throne he built. "I take no joy in this, but Silverfang cannot be ruled by a traitor wearing a crown." The crowd murmured, uncertain, caught between the king they remembered and the queen they'd been mourning his death for. Liar. Sylvia's voice cracked across the square. Before the guards holding her could stop it, she broke free with a wrench that tore skin from her wrist and climbed the platform steps 2 at a time, dragging someone behind her. The bound rogue from the marsh, hauled along on a length of stolen rope, his face fevered but his eyes clear. "Tell them," Sylvia said. "Tell them who hired you." "Princess Regina," the rogue said, loud enough to carry. "Paid in coin no court would trace. Ordered to leave no witnesses at the sanctuary near Thornmere." A gasp moved through the crowd like wind through wheat. "He's lying," Regina said, too quickly. "Then explain this." Sylvia drew the goblet from beneath her cloak, the one Agnes had recovered from the burned sanctuary's hidden cellar, residue still crusted along its rim, the royal seal unmistakable beneath the grime. "Your physician will recognize the poison. He treated the king for a fever no illness ever caused." A man near the front of the crowd went pale. The royal physician himself, summoned for the spectacle, never meant to be questioned by name. His voice shook. "I noted the symptoms didn't match natural causes. I was told not to ask further." "You were told," Sylvia said, "because she needed your silence more than your honesty." The council members standing behind Regina exchanged glances that no longer hid their doubt. One stepped back from her side, then another. The careful distance of men, recalculating which side of history they wanted to stand on. A year of reforms, a year of quiet fear keeping every objection swallowed, and it took one blood-stained goblet to remind them all how easily loyalty could be bought back by the truth. "Enough," Regina snapped, color rising in her face. "A rogue's confession and a dirty cup prove nothing." "They prove everything," Ralph said, finding his voice for the first time since the platform. "Regina, let it end here. Let me speak to the council myself." "No." Something fractured behind Regina's eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the particular panic of a plan finally outrunning the one who built it. She turned to the soldiers still loyal to her crown. "Silence them." Now, the arrow came from the crowd's edge, fast and silent, aimed not at Ralph, but at the girl standing beside him with the goblet still raised. Ralph moved before he had time to decide to. He caught the arrow meant for Sylvia's chest in his own shoulder, the impact spinning him into her, both of them going down together against the platform boards. "Ralph." Sylvia's hands found the wound instantly, pressing hard against blood, already spreading dark through his shirt. No, stay with me. Don't you dare." "Worth it," he managed, breath ragged, a ghost of that same crooked smile even now. "Better me than you. Don't you dare make jokes." Her voice broke entirely. "Don't you dare leave me after everything." The square had erupted into chaos around them. Guards turning on guards, the council shouting for order no one was giving. But Sylvia heard none of it. Only him, his pulse stuttering weak beneath her palms, his eyes fighting to stay open. "I love you," she said, the words tearing loose at last, no longer dangerous to say, because there was nothing left to lose by saying them. "I have, for longer than I let myself admit. So you don't get to die here. Not after I already dug you out of one grave." Something in him steadied at that. Not the wound closing, not the blood slowing, but something underneath it that held on simply because she'd asked it to. He breathed. He kept breathing. In the chaos, Regina broke for the side stairs. White coronation robes hiked above her knees. 2 guards still loyal enough to follow her flight. She made it as far as the courtyard gate, before a wall of her own former council blocked the way. Men who'd just watched a poisoned goblet undo a year of careful lies. "Move," she ordered, voice cracking for the first time in years. No one moved. They took her without much struggle in the end. The woman who'd buried a king, hunted an orphan, and burned a sanctuary, finally out of soldiers willing to die for her name. Behind them, on the platform, Sylvia held Ralph's head against her lap, his blood still warm beneath her hands, and refused, for the second time in her life, to let go of someone the kingdom had already started mourning. Regina's trial lasted 3 days, though everyone in the hall knew by the first hour how it would end. She stood before the council in plain grey, instead of coronation white, and when they asked why, she didn't reach for the excuses she'd once handed her soldiers so easily. "I told myself it was for Silverfang," she said, Stronger borders, harder rule. I believed, truly, that mercy was making us weak. A pause. The first honest one anyone had heard from her in a year. But if I'm honest, and I owe this court honesty, if nothing else, I wanted the throne to be mine, before I ever believed it needed saving. I let fear of losing it convince me my father was already trying to take it away. I loved power more than I loved trust. That's the whole of it. Everything else was a story I told myself to make it bearable. The corrupt council members who'd funded her reforms were stripped of their seats and their titles within the week. Their lands returned to the packs they'd bled dry. Regina herself was spared the gallows she'd built for her father. Ralph's one condition: delivered from a hospital cot he refused to leave until Sylvia allowed it, and sentenced instead to a cell in the Northern Keep, for life, with nothing but time to sit with what fear and ambition had cost her family. Sylvia stood before the same council 3 days later, not as a defendant, but as a woman the kingdom owed an apology it had never thought to give. 23 years. The eldest councilman said, an orphan of this kingdom lived beneath our notice, while the bloodline that should have protected her was murdered protecting her instead. We failed you before you could walk. We are sorry for it now, however late. Sylvia accepted it plainly, without performance, the way she accepted most things. Sister Agnes survived the fire and the capture both, stubborn as the stone walls she'd once tended, and was named keeper of the royal archives before the month was out. The only role, she said, she'd ever wanted, buried in old records where the truth couldn't be burned twice. The bloodline in Sylvia's blanket, once traced fully, led to a scattering of distant cousins in the northern villages. No throne waiting, no crown to claim, just people who wept to learn a piece of their family had survived after all. Sylvia visited each of them herself, once Ralph was strong enough to travel, and came home from every visit a little less certain she'd ever truly been alone. Ralph, once his strength returned, stood before the same council that had watched his daughter's downfall and refused the one thing they expected of him. I won't rule alone again, he said, not because I can't, because I shouldn't have to, and because the woman beside me reminded me what kind of king I meant to be before I forgot to ask. He didn't crown her that day. Sylvia asked for something else first: sanctuaries, rebuilt across every province, and healer houses staffed by women like her, who'd learned medicine from necessity instead of privilege, so no child in Silverfang would ever again grow up believing no one would notice if they disappeared. Ralph granted it before she'd finished asking. Months later, when the orphanages stood roofed and the healer houses had their first patients, Ralph led her back into Blackwood Forest, past the ranger's cabin, past the marsh, where she'd once outrun 5 rogues without raising a hand. The clearing looked nothing like it had. Where the grave had been, someone, Ralph, though he never said so directly, had planted a garden. Silver-leafed trees ringed a stone marker etched simply, for those betrayed by the ones who should have protected them. Let this ground remember mercy instead. They stood at its edge as the moon rose over Blackwood, the same forest that had once carried the scent of alpha blood and now carried nothing but quiet. The day you pulled me from that grave, Ralph said, taking her hand. You didn't just save a king. Sylvia squeezed his fingers, the same hands that had once torn through frozen earth until they bled. No, I simply refused to let someone die alone. And because of that, he said, neither of us ever had to be alone again. They walked from the clearing together, beneath the moonlight, past the garden that had grown where a grave once lay, back toward a kingdom that had finally learned to tell the truth about its own history. The kingdom would remember the king who rose from the grave. Bards would sing it in every village square, embellished a little more with every retelling, until the story wore smooth as river stone. But those who knew the whole truth remembered something greater, an orphan Omega with no surname, no pack, and no reason to believe anyone was worth saving, who knelt in the dirt anyway and dug until her hands bled, proving that compassion, however small it starts, can resurrect hope and justice and love.